Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, good morning to those of you in different time zones. Welcome to the movie club session of the 2021 UFMG Summer School on Brazilian Studies. My name is Lucas Lima. I'm professor of international law. And the purpose of this activity is to allow you not only to know a little more about the Brazilian culture, but have an important and interesting occasion to exchange your ideas with prominent Brazilians about other prominent Brazilians. And we have the honor this afternoon to have with us Daniel Dreifuss. And for us, it's an honor to host him at UFMG, and especially for this specific opportunity. He is talking to us directly from Los Angeles. And this occasion, this session will be quite informal, as you are already aware. But before we start, let me say two words about our special guest of our movie session. Daniel Dreifuss is currently in a post-production on the high-profile retelling of the classic All Quiet on the Western Front, directed by Edward Berger and starring Daniel Brühl for Netflix. Dreifuss' film career began with the Oscar-nominated No in Spanish, directed by Pablo Larraín, starring Gael García Bernal, and an inspiring film that won the directors fortnight in Cannes in 2012. In Chile's first, it was Chile's first ever Academy Award nominated film, and I really suggest for those of you that are interested in Latin America to watch this movie, which is a fantastic movie about a specific moment of the Latin American history. Dreifuss' last film, Sergio, also for Netflix, world premiered in the Sundance and was released in April 2020. Sergio is based on the book by the Pulitzer-winning Samantha Power, stars Narcos, Wagner Moura, and Ana de Armas, and it was directed by Greg Barker. It was shot in Brazil, Jordan, and in Thailand. Sergio is the most prominent, perhaps, name of the Brazilian international civil servants. As the movie shows to you, he was considered to become the next Secretary General of the United Nations Organization after Kofi Annan, and he was one of the most charismatic international civil servants, also participating in a number of interviews and in a number of activities in Brazilian public debate. This is an important distinction that we should stress about Sergio's career. He was not a Brazilian diplomat. He was not serving Brazilian interests. He was someone who entered the United Nations, and there he went through the ranks and up to the top of the career, reaching this important position on the Commissary for the Refugees. He was someone that was, as I said, of a great charisma, a strong character, and one may ask why he didn't follow what would be the natural path for him of someone with his capacities and his qualities to become a Brazilian diplomat. And this the answer lies in the fact that his father was a prominent diplomat that during the Brazilian dictatorship, he was sacked from this position, and this resentment, this strong relationship with the dictatorship made Sergio follow a different path, but still in the diplomatic career. What the movie Sergio depicts is a high successful Brazilian that contributed significantly to different solutions, different situations in international level, international geopolitics. And it also increased the reputation of Brazil and international civil servants, and also the reputation of the UN up to a certain point, till his death, that is drastically depicted in the movie. But I'm not here to talk to you about the movie. We have a very important guest with us, and I immediately give the floor to Daniel to tell us a little bit about this project, his choices. And immediately after that, we open the floor to you. You may raise your hand. We give you the floor. You can talk to Daniel directly. And if you want to send the questions through the chat, you can also do it. I can read. That is, it's up to you. The important thing here is that you enjoy this opportunity of exchange ideas. Daniel, once more, thank you very much for accepting our invitation with through Luciana, and you have the floor, please.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. I understand we may have people from a variety of places around the world. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, Luciana. Thank you, UFMG, as I remember, UFMG for the world. I'm here. It's a place I hold great fondness from. My father was a professor there. When I was a child, I spent a lot of time on campus and at the university. I also did study there briefly before I moved on to another city. And I have very fond memories of the institution, and it's a pleasure to be back, having a chance to talk about my work and the film and Sergio Vieira de Mello, Sergio Vieira de Mello, a very special, unique Brazilian man who had a very distinctive voice on the international stage. I think a very needed voice in the world today. I wish we had a voice like Sergio's, or more specifically, I wish we had his voice with us today. A man who looked at the world from a place of empathy, which is very needed in the current affairs of the world and the Brazilian reality specifically. A classy, elegant man who worked very hard for sustainable peace, for international security, for better living conditions of individuals, who cared about the people, not just agreements in hallways and forums and palaces and institutions. He cared about the people. He went into many conflict zones, challenging situations, probably saw more human suffering than most people in this world have seen in various parts of the world for various reasons, and dedicated his life and career to really to helping the displaced, refugees, restoring national identities, and brought many people home from exile who were refugees, of course. And it's a shame that we don't have him with us today, as his life tragically ended in August of 2003. So now in Baghdad, so now almost 20 years ago. And I would love to keep this very casual. I would be happy to talk about any area of the film and the making of this movie, or what inspired us to tell the story, or how the project came together. It was made for Netflix. We shot in 2018, and as Lucas mentioned, we shot in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, because that's where Sergio was from, and that's where his mind always went back. And that's a place I think he, as he said, he wanted to go back to. And then we shot in Jordan, and we shot in Thailand, and we shot one day in New York City. So I guess you could say we had 4 continents there. So it is a very international story, and we try to keep the authenticity, which is always something that guided us through this process, as a north to bring the authenticity and preserve the authenticity in the story. There are reasons why we couldn't shoot in the specific locations of the story. That's very common with films. We couldn't tell this particular story the way we did it by shooting in Baghdad for, I think, obvious reasons. Timor is not a place that currently has a film industry that would allow us to perform the film and the process of shooting this particular story the way we did. It's also remote, and access was a question. But we were able to bring Timorese people to the set in Thailand, which is for me one of my most joyous moments of the whole process. I'm happy to talk more about that. But I would like to keep this very informal and would love to hear whatever questions may be of interest to any of you. It would be really interesting if I had an idea of where people are from when they ask the questions, if they have any insights into the story. You know, Sergio worked in many places in the world, from Sudan to Cyprus to obviously Timor and the places depicted in the film, but many places that we couldn't fit into the story as we framed it for the film, right? We had Bosnia and many other places that were very relevant, Bangladesh, you know, the many places starting in the early 70s all the way through 2000 that just could not make the story cohesively as a movie, which does not mean they are any less important in Sergio's personal and professional life. So I would love to answer any questions you may have and keep the conversation going.
Thank you, Daniel. Guys, the floor is open, and the chat is open also to you. Please raise your hands and ask the questions. Perhaps I could start if no one has a question, but this is the kind of curiosity that I watched yesterday for the second time. And to me, there is a richness of detail of the movie about certain details of the life of Sergio. And my personal question is, as a movie producer, when you have to decide certain scenes and decide certain dialogues of such an important figure, how do you fulfill these specific details? For instance, the scene of asking Carolina in marriage, something that specific scene with all the details of the little hearts, etc. How do you fulfill these scenes that? I know that you have the book, but it's not only the book that is there, apparently. I do not remember that passage from the book specifically. So my question to you is, how do you figure to transform all this, the richness of detail that the movie has about Sergio's life?
Well, I think that whenever you are making a movie, there are things that you take license with, and there are things that you don't. There are things that in this particular case we felt we could not take license with, and that was the essence of the man, and anything that had to do with his actual work. When it came to his life or the man himself, outside of his work, outside of the work of the refugees, outside of the reality of the things that he actually was able to accomplish, those things we actually have a little bit more freedom, right? Although we kept it pretty close to what it was, unusually close for a film, I must say. And I'm proud of that, and I think the whole team of the movie was very proud of that. Greg Barker, who's the director, also made the feature film, the documentary feature, not the narrative feature, before we made the narrative feature Sergio, also called Sergio, also available on Netflix. So if anybody's interested in knowing more about the real people, who Gil actually was, how he in the movie, Gil, for example, is a composite of more than one person who was with Sergio at different times. But if anybody's interested in knowing more about the people themselves, or Carolina, or any of the other players in Sergio's life, or Sergio, and hear more from his own voice, check out the documentary, which is really beautiful. So because Greg had spent so many years in researching Sergio's life, and met so many people in Sergio's inner circle who knew him from childhood. We had access to a lot of stories, and the hearts actually seemed to be true. He actually did have a suitcase of hearts that he handed to Carolina, and in a version where he was trying to either win her back or demonstrate his love for her, and that he actually meant it, and that it was something to be continued after that particular task in Timor, and the program ended and they were to move on, and that he wanted her to continue as part of his life. So the hearts were based on truth, as it's one of those things that as a producer, when you hear that, you think this sounds like it's out of a movie, but it's a true story. And it's great when life gives you those bits, because then you hold on to that. And sometimes, yes, truth can be stranger than fiction, but it's great when you find something that you have as a platform to expand upon that is anchored in the truth of the character and something that happened in their lives. So there are other things that we were able to combine or merge timelines or characters, but that specific element is actually anchored in a true story, as was narrated to us by somebody close to Sergio. Did it look exactly as it did in the film? That's up for each person's imagination, but that was our version of it.
Thank you very much. And it was nice to hear that that was a true story. The floor is open. I have more questions, but the point here is not that I continue to ask questions to Daniel. Stephanie, please introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Good afternoon. I'm from Peru. I study international relations, and yesterday was the first time that I heard about Sergio. And it was very strange for me because as an international relations student, I had to hear his name somewhere or read it, but I forgot. And my question is, why is it important to know about Sergio's story, not just him as a Brazilian civil servant, but him as a person?
Thanks for the question, and glad that we have somebody from Peru with us today. Listen, I think that Sergio is a Brazilian that many Brazilians have not heard of. I think that unless he was a rock star for those who are interested in international relations and who are focused on international conflicts or have an eye to these crisis zones around the world. He was on TV in Brazil. I remember him in the 90s speaking. He was one of the few Brazilians. I'm going to speak from my own memory. Now, growing up in Brazil, he was one of the few Brazilians, maybe the only Brazilian, outside of the world of sports or entertainment that I saw in the news on the international stage until President Lula came to be an international face. Sergio was the only person I thought that I saw on TV as an international figure, but from Brazil, you know, a worldwide figure that spoke on international matters, but being a Brazilian. I think, as I said in the beginning, for me, somebody who had such a, you know, he was the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the time of his death. And I think that he has a trajectory that is very commendable, very rare. He ascended through the ranks of the United Nations when he, after 68, he studied in Paris, right? And he participated in the protests in the riots of 68 or the movement of 68. And then actually was hit by a police man and actually had a scar above one of his eyes. And therefore, he did not follow a diplomatic career because he had a record. And he also felt that it was not safe to return to Brazil because it was a dictatorship. So he pursued that path. But it was kind of like a secondary path in his life. And in that path, he found the ability to touch more people's lives than he probably would have in any other way. And the work that he has done, whether it's negotiating with the Khmer Rouge, when everyone said, even the people in his own circle, that it was insanity to negotiate with the Khmer Rouge and try and ensure the security and the safety of the almost 400,000 refugees, Cambodian refugees, as they returned to Khmer Rouge occupied territories. Or when he was able to recreate Timor as a country and give them their sovereignty. Or all the crisis zones that he worked along the way, Lebanon, as we mentioned, Bosnia, Sudan, Bangladesh, Cyprus, all of these places, all of the things that he was able to accomplish in his life from a place of empathy, from a place of seeing the people, from a place of talking to the people on the streets and listening to the people on the streets, breaking this habit that a lot of institutions, even well-meaning institutions, have of being protected by the hallways, of being protected by the walls of the academia or the bureaucracy or the government, but actually go out into the world. I think that there was something very unique to him, and this look of empathy to the world that he had is a very needed voice today. And I thought it was interesting to shed light on a Brazilian who was a fantastic man and did so much around the world in crisis zones for others.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your question. Thank you, Daniel. Juliana, please.
Hi, so my name's Juliana, and I am Brazilian American. You can probably tell by my name, it's a Brazilian name, but I've basically grown up in the United States my entire life. So I found this movie very interesting, especially with the interactions between Sergio and the US, specifically the Secretary of State. And I was wondering if you ever, I guess, met any pushback in the filming and how you portrayed him, because I believe the administration was very controversial at the time, and you can even kind of sense in the movie like some of his ideas about how the UN should serve were kind of controversial, at least in my point. So I thought that was interesting. I was wondering if you could answer that.
No, we did not have pushback whatsoever. Is the pushback you mean from the studio, from Netflix in the making of the movie and portraying those scenes, or you mean pushback from any governmental agency?
I guess more like governmental agencies or like other American institutions.
No, we did not. It would be very unusual that I think the government will come out and speak about a film that could, thread very closely to censorship. And I think that would not reflect positively on a country that, especially here, when freedom of speech is such a high standard in the country and a cause of pride here, as it should be. We never had any pushback, no. I think we made a decision to portray honestly the fact that Sergio and Bremer at the time clashed through their positions or the entities that they represented at the time, or the worldviews that represented, where Sergio, again, from a place of looking at the people, felt like he had the access like he had in Timor, which he didn't, and that the people of Iraq should decide their own destiny. And I think the United States had perhaps slightly different plans and felt that returning the power to the people with their own voice of choosing their representatives and their government was not necessarily the United States strategy at that time. I think we all know that that excursion into Iraq had very lasting and damaging consequences. I don't think it's a secret. The world is watched and is watching what followed. Obviously had very damaging consequences for the United Nations and the tragic incident in the Canal Hotel that took Sergio's life along with other 20 or so people. Not just Sergio died on that day, let's remember. I think that we just really wanted to show the story of somebody who saw the world differently. And I think Sergio did that unusually by going out onto the streets, but also from something that some people even criticized him for, which was shaking hands with people to achieve the results that he wanted in practical terms for the displaced, for the refugees, for the people of a country that he was trying to help, that he established dialogue and shook hands and made deals like with the Khmer Rouge with people who were considered unsavory, many for very, very valid reasons. So I think that was something that was unique to Sergio, and we wanted to have that in the film. Is also largely the reason why, unfortunately, he came to perish on that August 19th. So I hope that answers the question. But no pushback from any governmental agencies.
Thank you, Juliana. This had the opportunity to talk about this. I think that at the moment, Sergio had not many occasions to stress his position because he was serving the UN, and it would not be specifically, I wouldn't say allowed, but he had to dialogue with the US and the coalition at the moment. But I think that the fact that the general position in international law, international relations about the legality of the war and the presence of the coalition in Iraq does not allow the moment that we are today do not allow to question the impact and what was behind all that. So I think that it's also nice that in the movie it was stressed the personal position of the character, and still he was there and still he was trying to make the difference in that context. Ícaro, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. I am Ícaro. I'm from Contagem, Minas Gerais, Brazil. And my question is, I love this movie, and I has a scene with Carolina Lahira talks with an old lady in Timor-Leste. And this scene, I think that brings such powerful drama to the movie and such powerful moments to rethink how the society and other cultures brings to the world. And I know I want to know how was the decision to bring this scene and others scenes like the scene with a lot of hearts in the room and between Sergio and Carolina, and also I didn't know who was Sergio before see the movie, and I think it's so important to we knows more about Brazilian peoples who has a lot of importance in around the world. Not only musicians, sport, soccer players, but politics persons. Thanks.
Boa tarde, Ícaro. Boa tarde, Minas Gerais. Saudades. Okay, just had to, because that's where I was raised. So listen, I've talked about the heart scene because that was, I think, the first question that we had. And that actually is based on a story that was shared with Greg when he was doing the documentary. And so we take it as that was partially true or inspired by something that happened. And the lady scene on the streets of Timor is the scene that I get asked or have been asked the most by far ever since the film came out last year. It's a scene that I'm very happy has struck a chord with people. People tell me, many people have told me, people I know or people I don't know from many parts of the world, that is the scene that moved them the most in the movie or that they cried. And it makes me very happy for a variety of reasons. One, that scene, based on what I just mentioned about going out into the streets and the people that were not in these big hallways, the people on the streets, the people that were actually the reason for the conversation to take place. I think Senhorinha is her name. I think she encapsulates a lot of that. And since we couldn't have many repeated beats in the film, she is a lot of that moment. She represents that person, that the common person who has felt personally in the story, in the movie, she lost her family to the war. She is alone. She is trying to pick up the pieces and come home. And she is our heroine in that sense, who is the person who inspires and motivates Sergio to do what he does. Senhorinha, the woman in the story, is not an actress. She is one of the people, real people, that we had the pleasure of bringing from East Timor to Thailand to shoot the film. This is one of my favorite things about this film, is that in our quest for authenticity, we, upon arriving in Thailand, realized we did a scout for Timorese people in Thailand. There's many displaced people and still in other parts of Southeast Asia. And we did a scout, we found a few, we got in touch with the consulate, we got a couple in Cambodia, and we shot that scene on the border with Cambodia, Thailand and Cambodia, literally on the border, very close to the border. And we got a few more. We had some that were in Australia, but finally we realized that to make that scene authentic, the only way we could actually do it without shooting Thai people or Cambodian people and pretending they were Timorese, even though I believe we know that most of the world would not know the difference, the Timorese people would know the difference. We would know the difference. And I think that when you're telling a story that is so sensitive and is so meaningful to a people and to a country, and largely also, as Al-Qaeda said, that taking Timor from Indonesia was what sealed his fate, when they said that he had taken that piece of the caliphate and that, his days were numbered. We had to treat that with respect. And the way we could do it was by bringing the Timorese to be in the scene. So we were very fortunate that a variety of people actually agreed. And we had in that scene a lot of very interesting people, a lot of people in academia, the leader of the women's movement of Timor, PhD doctors from the university, and they all wanted to be in that scene as market people, as peasants, as people of the real people. In Carolina's efforts with the women in the textile hut, all of them wanted to be part of telling their own story. And for me, that's one of the greatest joys that we had in this movie. The text that Senhorinha tells Sergio, the story that she tells, the text itself, it's also lifted almost verbatim from something that actually was told to Sergio. And so we were able to bring that to the film as well. And obviously it strikes a chord with Sergio, who this notion of coming home or belonging to a place, a man that had also moved so many times in his life, which contributed to difficulties in his personal life by being relocated every so many years. And this idea of belonging somewhere and having roots, and his desire to go back to Rio at the end of it all. I'm glad you enjoyed the scene. That market scene we created, obviously none of that existed, is a regular village where people live. A funny additional anecdote, just because it's movies. We had a different location for the market and the marketplace. And a couple of days before we were to shoot that scene, we lost that location. And part of the reason why we lost that location is because the location that we had chosen when we had the permits and everything was too close to the Cambodian border. And since we had tanks and guns that were very realistic, the Thai government decided that it would not be advisable, and they were right, to bring guns and war efforts to the border when Cambodia did not necessarily know that we were making a movie. And we did not want to start an international incident of any kind. So they kindly declined our permit that they had granted. And we scrambled manically in 48 hours, and kudos to the whole art department of Sergio, because we recreated the market in this new location, which was actually much better for the film. It's probably one of my favorite sets in all of the film. And it really came together in record time. And it was a nail biter to the very end. And it was also monsoon season. So when you see the rain in the movie, it's not real rain. But we did have the same rain other parts of the day when we did not need the rain. So it was a difficult location, but maybe one of the most rewarding ones we had in the making of Sergio.
Thank you, Ikaru, for your question and for allowing Daniel to tell us this story. And Rodrigo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's very nice having you here joining us today. I'm a law student here at Minas Gerais. My name is Rodrigo. And actually, my question concerns the relationship between Sergius and the UN. I think there was a very prevalent view, a very prevalent impression during the Cold War that the United Nations was the sort of suffering from paralysis institution due to the opposition between the two poles, the US and the USSR. And it was actually a very bureaucratic institution with many difficulties to implement its mission on peace and security. And in a certain way, I had the impression that one of the things your feature allows us is to defy this sort of impression that we had of the United Nations at that time, not only during the Cold War, but also during the 90s, sort of the highlight of the UN peacekeeping missions and the overseeing of elections and so on. So I'd like to know if this was actually one of the targets of the movie. If you wanted to tell sort of a backstory of what happened inside the UN during Sergio's career, and also the role he had to play in this transformation, in the efforts that were made to implement the mission of the UN, despite the difficulties in the Security Council and in general politics. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Rodrigo. Listen, we did not go into the film with a conscious mission of explaining the role of the United Nations during the Cold War. I think that when you're trying to tell a story in a feature film format that's going to be in theaters and on Netflix, you have a lot of choices to make. And those choices are, you have to sacrifice, you can't tell everything, and you have to find a cutout that is a cohesive narrative structure for a film. I think that the role of the UN and how the UN was efficient and how they could work and how they could actually make a difference in the practical world doesn't have to be another thread in the film, because it's precisely highlighted by Sergio's own work on behalf of the UN. Of course, we shed light on a lot of which was his own will, his own vision of the world, his own strategies and thoughts and visions, even if they sometimes could clash with what was traditionally expected of the UN, but he was acting on behalf of the UN. So I think that by telling Sergio's story, we bring with us a lot of what the UN was doing in some senses, some of which may not even be known, as you described, as efforts that the UN had or was able to actually have practical world implications and results that many people think the UN perhaps has not achieved or did not at that time. But you cannot go into a narrative feature and try and check every box of history, because then the film becomes aimless. And some people would say, well, it's so encumbered in political details and the bureaucracy and the conversations that take place in these offices and in this meeting, that then you would have what people would say is a boring movie. Or you would have a very static film, always inside, always people talking without any visual action or dramatic action. The film would have no heart. Then you might as well do a documentary series about how the UN actually works on the inside, right? I'm sure there is a movie which is all inside the UN chambers and the conversations that take place between those people, all interiors, all day. But that is not the world that we depicted, especially because Sergio was a man who, as I have said, and I'm going to repeat myself, lived his life on the field, looking at the people. When he goes into the forest to find the Khmer Rouge, that is as far from the fancy hallways as you can get, right? So I think that to honor Sergio's story, you had to shift the story to the field and the places and the people. So we hope we touched upon the United Nations through Sergio, but we did not try to tell specifically so much of the United Nations story. I just want to make a parenthesis and say that Pulitzer Prize winning author Samantha Power, who wrote the seminal book on Sergio. These are two versions, two covers of the same book. I'm going to bring it closer to the screen so you can see it. This is the real man. This is another cover of the same book. It's called Sergio, One Man's Fight to Save the World. It's a very dense read, but a fascinating read. If you want to know more about all of these stations that Sergio had, his direct impact, the geopolitical context and consequences of his presence, the UN's presence, and a lot about Sergio's life. It's a fantastic resource, but we were not trying, although the film has that as a source, we were not trying to literally bring all of the book or all of his life to the screen.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Kenneth, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Kenneth. I'm from Panama, and I have a question. But first, I wanted to say that the movie feels like a full circle to me. It has the perfect amount of this political conflict in one part, and then the perfect amount of personal life of Sergio. And I wanted to know, how do you guys come up with the idea of making the film the way that is portrayed? For example, there's more ways to portray a film, like, you know, in decided to portray it with some present maybe. So I wanted to know, my question is, how do you come up with the idea of making the movie the way that it's done? Because it feels very full circle to me, and I wanted to know that.
Thank you for your question. Listen, again, I think that going into Sergio's story, because he went so many places, we couldn't go to every location that he went to. Some could say, oh my gosh, his work in Bosnia was so meaningful. How is it not in the movie? But we couldn't string together all of these places and locations and languages, and it would be very fragmented. So to make a cohesive narrative, we had to narrow down and create a frame from which to work. And we focused on Timor, which is perhaps his greatest or one of his greatest achievements in what he did. And as far as practical results from his efforts and the creation of that new nation at the time, and the freedom that it allowed its people. We've obviously, the story was anchored in the present time of the movie in Baghdad, because that's where he died and that's where he spent his last days, and that's where he was trapped in the rubble, reminiscing, as we have in the film, about his life, which is largely true, because as if you were to watch the documentary, Bill, who was one of the men trying to rescue him, and as it is medically, you try to keep the person in danger speaking. So he kept Sergio talking for all that while, which allows for us, if we were to think somebody's trapped, becoming aware that he may not leave that place, where does your mind go to in your last 2 hours as the clock ticks and you realize that you might not make it out? And I think at some point during that time, it became clear to Sergio that he probably would not leave the rubble, unfortunately. So we framed it that way. Obviously, Timor brought Carolina into Sergio's life and brought Carolina into our story. And then you frame the romance of it all. So I think Timor also is a highlight in his life, because that's when his personal life and his professional life both were whole. And I think therefore the man was whole, right? And they came together. And there was a moment of bliss in his life, of harmony, where everything was in accord. That's kind of how we went about framing the film. We have Cambodia because that gave us an insight into the life that he had in 68, or taking risks even against Gil's and other people's advice of shaking hands with the Khmer Rouge, or going into the forest to find those people and abandoning, as I mentioned, the conventional halls in which most diplomatic deals are done. But that was a little bit of our framing of the story. And again, we wanted to take Carolina and Sergio's story as the guide, and humanize Sergio as well. So he didn't become just a person who, not just a UN operative of the greatest order, but also a man, right? A man behind the title. And we hope we did that. A complex man with flaws, with many extraordinary characteristics, but complex, as most people are complex. And I hope we had a chance to bring that by framing it this way. And therefore, because the film is predicated entirely on memory, since the bomb goes off right in the beginning, and we flash back and forth between that moment and these various points in his life, they don't have to be chronological. They don't have to be logical necessarily. because it's coming from a place of memory. And the memory of a man in that situation allows him to go to all of these different locations, all of these different times in its own order and pace. And where it goes to, it's a little bit like a pinball machine. And we kind of use that effect to frame the story. The story was not originally framed with that broken structure. The first act of the film was originally linear. We saw his arrival in Iraq, we saw all of Iraq play, and the bomb was going to go off, let's say, minute 25. But we realized that narratively, it would make more sense if the bomb went off right in the beginning, and then the whole film was told from a place of memory. So that's how we have the version of the film you saw today.
Thank you, Kenneth, for your question. Paulo, I know that you are next on the line, but Camila has asked the floor before you, but she was not able to raise her hand. Camila, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you. If Paulo wants to go first, it's okay.
No, you can go. It's okay.
All right. Okay. I'm from São Paulo, and the question that I have is a little bit polemic. So I saw on the internet that Carolina Lariera said that the movie spared the UN from the blame because it was actually the UN's decision to cut the security off from the building. First, is that true? And second, if it is, why did the movie choose to tell a different story?
Let me just make sure I understand the question. You're asking if it's polemical because you're saying it was not Sergio's decision to remove the security from the front of the UN offices in Baghdad. Listen, according to, if you watch documentary, okay, Bill, who was the, I believe, sergeant, and pardon if I am mistaken, who was the United States person who actually was there and was then the one trying to save Sergio, was the one who got into a very, very heated argument that day when the orders came directly from Sergio to remove the guards. I think that removing the decision from Sergio makes Sergio even more so of a victim. Well, a victim he, of course, is. But I think he made a decision to symbolically say the United Nations is not literally under, with snipers on the roof, under the dominance of the United States, and is not a megaphone for the United States, because he felt that therefore he could not do his job of actually achieving what he wanted as an independent party and actor on that stage. Furthermore, he had perhaps, as we discussed, a slightly different view of what the next step should be from the United States. So as we understand, and as most of the history books have it, and as most of the people who were there that day will tell you, and I would urge you to watch the documentary, Sergio, also by Greg Barker, that was Sergio's decision to remove the US military from the guard of the compound of the Canal Hotel. So we will go with the version of the story that we have heard from a variety of credible sources as they chose to share the story with us. And that seems to, I have not heard a lot of conversations about that point that you bring up, because it seemed to be pretty much settled matter for most people. He will always be a victim of that tragic incident, as were all the other 90 people or so who were injured, and the 20 also who lost their lives. But I don't think that the way to make him a victim is simply to say that he did not make that decision to remove the guards. He is a victim regardless, as are the other people.
Thank you very much, Camila, for your question. I completely agree with Daniel on this point. And I think that it doesn't matter that much who is the fault for what would happen if the security was there. The point is that there was a terrorist attack for a specific organization. That is more or less where we should perhaps look in this specific.
I'm sorry, Luke, I just wanted to add one thing. Where I think you need to point your gaze to is that it's the multiple reports that the United States had information that a terrorist attack was possible, perhaps likely, and that may have not been shared with the United Nations and with Sergio. So, unaware of the impending threat, he made the decision to remove it. Had he had the information, the intelligence, maybe the decisions would have been different and maybe all of this would have been different. But I think that that is a valid question, and unfortunately, the intelligence may not have been shared.
Yes, I agree with you, Daniel. Paulo, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paulo. I'm a music student in UFMG. And I also didn't know about Sergio's story. And I think I was very touched by it. And I feel like you kind of have already answered my question, but it was about the construction of character of Sergio, because you have two forces fighting. The force that he was a man who was dealing with conflict and all of these dangerous negotiations, and also a very human man. And I just wanted to ask if that decision was to consciously humanize even more Sergio, to have these flashbacks and all of this love with Carolina and all of those things. This is my question.
Listen, his love story with Carolina is very much real. I think all of the friends, the personal friends, he introduced her as his fiance and then as his wife, I think, to a lot of his friends. And, you know, she won in Brazil the recognition as his civil spouse. And there's a reason for that. I think her story is very anchored in reality. How they met, you know, in Timor, not necessarily running on the beach exactly, but probably very close to. They did run a lot. It was something that was very part of their lives on the beach. But I think you're absolutely right. I think Sergio is one of those people that had a struggle, was a rare, very rare, exceptional professional, the likes of which we may not see again for a long time, and had a complicated personal life. And we didn't have to fictionalize that. I think that we didn't try to make him, you know, a devil or a saint. We didn't try to erase things, you know, that he was married when he first technically married, although it seems that they had been separated for a variety of years. He did have affairs along the way in different parts of the world, and I think that's also quite known. You know, and he had perhaps a difficult relationship with his sons, only in the sense that he saw them not as often and far, physically far. And we tried with tact and care to hint at that without going into that story, because that's a personal part of his life that we could hint at, but we don't need to exploit. It was never our intention, and we would not be doing the film any merit by doing that. It felt beneath Sergio. But we don't shy away from showcasing that in the scene where he hesitates with the age of the son, or doesn't know what the son is allergic to, in the scene with the grandma. In a way, doesn't know his own sons as intimately as he should, and obviously how it weighs on him, right? And Carolina, who's much younger, seems more mature in a way about her approach to all of those personal issues, or is the one who breaks up with him and leaves him and saying, you know what, you don't know, come back to me if you ever figure out what you want with your life, because you don't seem to know. So he's a man who is able to create countries, but didn't necessarily have the same ability to create these bridges with his innermost family circle. And this dichotomy between the man who created countries and was able to strategize the whole world, but had a difficult time creating these meaningful relationships with his immediate people, it's just a very, again, history gave us that. We didn't invent that. We didn't have to make it more than it was or overt. And we also didn't have to hide it. So I think it's honest. But again, it's predicated on reality.
Thank you, Paulo. Now, Luciana, you have a question to Daniel.
Yes, I wanted to go, to another way, so to speak, thinking about the film production itself. I was thinking about the so many sets, the so many countries you've been. What was the kind of struggle you had doing that, the choosing of the sets, some anecdote, interesting anecdote like the one you shared with us. I was very interested to know a little bit more about this issue, because I would assume it's very complicated to, film in different places with different laws and different permits, I would imagine. And how was that struggle?
Thanks for the question, Luciana. Listen, making a film is always difficult. There are hundreds of people who worked on this film. And there was also a joy. We had our own mini United Nations in that sense in the making of the movie, because we had our key crew, right? We had the actors, we had the director, we had our cinematographer, we had the makeup artist, who's actually is from Brazil, but we had the costume designer was from Cyprus. The production designer was from South Africa. So we had people from all over the world. We all came, that's our core group. And that core group traveled around the world. That core group did go to every location. But in each location, we had our local crew. So in Brazil, we had a crew who spoke Portuguese. Obviously, they also speak English, who are very proficient and helped us with the locations, because obviously, well, I'm from Rio. I know the beach. I know Ipanema. If you say we can't shoot in Ipanema today because it's too crowded on a Sunday, we can go to Barra. I mean, I know the area, but I had never been to Jordan and I had never been to Thailand before we went to look at the location. So what we did is 2 world tours. We started in Los Angeles. We went on a scout of locations to Jordan. We went then look at locations, we looked at all these schools. The Canal Hotel in the movie is actually a school, and it was summer, so the school was off. So we, obviously created all of the rubble, created the wall, created the guards. None of that exists. The building itself is a school. And the building next door was a school for girls, and we took that and made it our base camp. Then we look at all these locations. Then we working with the local people who obviously speak Arab and know their world and how they function and have their customs, and we were there during Ramadan, and it was fantastic to experience that time being there and seeing the realities of that, including our crew who was fasting during the day because it was Ramadan, many of them. So it was fascinating to see that and work with that. And you have the prayers that go on, forgive me, 5 or 6 times a day. I am blanking on the number, but somebody hopefully here can help correct me. And so we have to stop for the prayers that are broadcast through the city and then go back because it couldn't be in the sound. So it was fascinating to be immersed in a new culture. And then when we moved to Thailand, it was the same thing. And in Thailand, we were based in Bangkok, but we also went to multiple cities. And we went to the city on the border with Cambodia, where we did all the East Timor scenes. We did the Cambodia scenes, but always on the Thai side. We did the ruins. All of that was Thailand. And as I mentioned, we couldn't shoot in Timor for logistical reasons. We couldn't, Thailand is a very proficient shooting destination. They do a lot of movies. They have a big local movie industry, but also they do commercials. They do music videos. They have a lot of equipment. They have crews and equipment, which is a big consideration. They have sound stages, right? And Jordan is a huge destination in the Middle East for film. There's a lot of countries in the Middle East that are amazing, but unfortunately, politically, they're not places that are stable enough to be film locations. Even insurance would not allow us to be there. So Jordan is where Star Wars shot, is where The Martian shot, is where all of these movies that take place in outer space, the deserts of Wadi Rum are a famous film location, and they have amazing crews, amazing equipment. And our movie for Jordan felt small because they get all these massive Disney, Marvel-like productions. So then we finished our tour, but instead of coming home, we went straight to Rio. Although our shoot in Rio was small, we came to Rio, stayed for a few weeks, prepping all the other locations, scouting Rio, and went looking at apartments to see where the mother's house would be, and went straight into the Rio shoot, then Jordan, then Thailand. So went around the world twice, then went back to LA and started post-production. It was done out of Los Angeles. And
How
I
long
remember
did
that
that take?
I left in May, end of May, and I came home at the very end of October or November 1st. So I was gone from end of May to November. It was a lot. And every time you change countries, every time you change locations is difficult. When you change cities is difficult. When you change countries, you're risking a lot. Somebody misses their flight. A flight is delayed. There were flights that were canceled. Then you're stranded in a forgive me, a airport. We spent the whole night in all of us, Wagner, Anna, all of the director, all of us on the floor sleeping, waiting because our flight out of, I believe, Amman going to Thailand was canceled or delayed by like 12 hours. So we were there overnight. It's hard when and then there's visa issues, and then somebody gets to Thailand, doesn't have a vaccine, then they cannot come in. It's a lot of fun. It was a joy. It was a privilege to work with the local people in each of these countries and see how, learn about the local culture, how they talk to each other and how cultures are different, and how the Brazilians are so different from the Jordanians, who are so different from the Thai people. All of them are amazing in their own right, but it was not easy, this shift around the world. It's not for the faint of heart to make a film in so many.
I can imagine. Thank you.
And it was monsoon season in Thailand. One thing that I would say, because I get asked a lot, let me see if this helps at all, shed any light, if of interest to anybody. This, let me reassemble, is originally, can you see this here? This structure? This structure is actually what a little model of what the shaft, as we call it, was in the movie. This, all of the rubble in, I'll bring just the floor here, the ground floor. So this is the rubble at the ground floor, and we have like a little figurine for Sergio. All of this was built on a sound stage in Thailand. It didn't exist. It's with all of the structure, which was 4 stories tall, like a building. I'll just bring this part here. So you can see you had many levels. And as you open it this way, it has, hopefully this translates to the screen. It has the various, even has like one of the guys coming down. This was created on a soundstage studio, right? In Thailand, with a remarkable engineering feat of the Thai crew and our production designer team, who created this out of nothing in a soundstage in Thailand. And that's where we did all the rubble scenes, and we shot the rubble scenes sequentially, like a play. So it was easier for the actors, especially for Wagner Moura, who plays Sergio, to take us on the progression, physical and emotional, of the character.
Perfect. Excellent.
Thank you, Luciana, for your question that allowed Daniel to show us this very precious pieces of, to allow us to understand how his profession works, especially for us that are not so used to the profession of how to make a movie. But I think that Daniel touched on one of the questions that we have on the chat. I know, Isabella, that you were the next on the line, but Cecilia from Puerto Rico asked the question. I will read it. Cecilia is saying, my question is, how was the decision to portray the scene in the languages they happened? I love the authenticity. Most films just use English, even though that's not the language spoken in the country where the story takes place. Perhaps connected to that, Daniel, would you like to share a piece of, you were telling us that you are used to work in a multicultural, multilinguistic environment, and the fact that you spent, I don't know, 7 months out of her house and dealing with all these multicultural experiences is more or less the spirit of this summer school here. How to deal with diversity and how to deal with different situations that arise in these internationalized or multiculturalized environments. Would you share perhaps a piece of advice connected with this Cecilia's question to all of us that want to pursue a career internationally? You are muted. Sorry, Daniel.
15 months in, and I'm still doing that. I would say, let's start with Cecilia. Okay. I would say, again, I said in the very beginning, authenticity was a north. Authenticity was always something that we aim for and we value and we treasured. That's why we went through the effort of bringing the people from Timor. That's why we try as best as we could to make the locations as authentic as they could, although we could not shoot the story where it took place in Baghdad. But we were, for example, very fortunate. It was very emotional for us to have the Timorese on set. And also, I want to point out, the people that played the victims of the bombing outside of the kind of hotel in Baghdad, many of them were real refugees. Many of them were real amputees who lost family members, who lost limbs, who lost their lives in the wars of the neighboring countries, specifically Iraq, some even in Syria. So I would say that having them want to put themselves back in that emotional place and seeing themselves covered in debris with bandages, with blood, was very cathartic for them, as well as it was a privilege for the film and very emotional for us. And we were all very touched and thankful that they chose to share their difficult experiences with us in a movie that is hopefully sheds light on human suffering and empathy and the need for empathy, and seeing the other, which is so needed right now, seeing the other in this world, and especially in the Brazilian context that we find ourselves. So we would never not make this movie in the local languages. But to speak Tetum or the local dialects, or to speak Arab authentically, we had to go to people who speak that language. We would not make this movie in English ever. We would not all of it in English. We kept the languages between Carolina and Sergio. We tried to, I had, this was something that for me was perhaps easier because I speak Spanish and I speak Portuguese. So I wanted their language in the movie to have a narrative sense. So when they are talking about work, they speak English, or they speak, they choose the language that they're speaking according to the subject matter. But when they change to personal things, they change back to the languages of their own, mostly Spanish. So the way that they place their languages had to do with what you're talking about, where the relationship is. But it would always be anchored in authenticity. So that's why we went with the languages, and also because we had a studio, Netflix, who supported that vision. I don't think any other studio in a city called Hollywood would have allowed us to make this movie in this way, in these locations, bringing people from Timor to speak Timorese, because it would have cost too much money, as it did, for what they felt the marketplace wanted and how many tickets you sell, and the business side of the show business. And we had a studio who believed in authenticity, and I had a studio who believed that authenticity was a reason that would make the film creatively better. It was not an expense only, it was an investment. And so Netflix supported us. I cannot think of anyone else who would have supported us in this way, and gave us a chance to tell the story the way you saw it. And being on the road is hard. It's not easy to leave for that many months. When you're gone for 7 months, the world keeps spinning without you. So you come home and people moved on. People got married, people changed jobs, people moved away, people had children. So yes, you feel a little out of touch, and you go a long time without seeing loved ones, and living out of a hotel room and living out of a suitcase for months on end. And it's not easy. It's not easy on the body, it's not easy on the mind, but at the same time, you do it because you believe you're doing something that is beautiful, and it's worth sharing, and it's worth telling. And you just hope that the final result will come together is with the same heart that you and your crew poured into in the making of it. It's not always that you go into a film with good intentions and a lot of heart, and the final result is good. There's so many things that happen in the life of a movie, so many people, that by the end, it may not be what you imagine it to be. And sometimes the process is not pleasant, but the film is great. Sometimes the process is amazing, but the film is not good. In this case, I was very pleased with the process, although it was hard. And I was very pleased with the film. So it's a happy story.
Thank you, Cecilia, for the question, and Daniel for answering. We still have four questions for you, Daniel, if you have time.
I do have time, but for the only thing is, again, this is live, everybody. Because this has gone a couple of minutes over, I'm gonna have to plug my computer. So if you allow me, 10 seconds.
Yes, please.
I'll get in. And then we can stay. Okay?
Good.
1 second.
Perfect. In the meantime, we'll wait, of course. And Luciana, please intervene.
Me?
Yes.
Well, okay, so a quick reminder. Okay, a quick reminder that has nothing to do with the session, but I have shared with you on our WhatsApp group the link to a Google form for you to register for the Luau next Friday. So for those of you who have musical talents or wants to recite a poem or something, fill in the form and so that we will organize the session better.
Thank you, Luciana, for the announcement. This Friday, right?
No, it's next Friday. It's our a closing event.
After my class. Good.
Yes, we are going to. Instead of having a caipirinha, Professor, instead of having caipirinha, we're having luau.
perhaps after we leave this transmission broadcast, we can go that. So Isabella.
See what happens. I leave and I come back 15 seconds later and we're talking about caipirinha. Maybe I should leave more often.
You left to LA, but we're still the same here in Belo Horizonte.
Yeah.
Isabella, please.
Good afternoon, guys. I'm Isabella from Montes Claros, Minas Gerais, and I study public relations at UFMG. So Daniel, my question, I have two questions for you. One is, what was your favorite part about producing Sergio? And the other one is, if you have in mind any other Brazilian character that you would like to produce or direct a movie about like Sergio. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start with the second. No one has ever asked me that question. I think Brazil has a lot of amazing stories. I am working on a mini series, fictional, but that has the backdrop of something historical in Brazil in the 70s and 80s. Who knows if it will happen? I hope it will. I hope you get to see it next year or whenever it happens. You know, movies take many years. It doesn't happen, or series. They take time between an idea and the characters are fictional, but the backdrop is real. There's another story that I am working on that actually has an anchor in another person in Brazil who's not known, but I wouldn't call them a national hero. He's just a Brazilian with an intriguing story. I'm sure there are many characters and cultural aspects of Brazil that I would love to explore. There's a script that I love, that I was involved with, that I am involved with, that takes place in Minas Gerais. I would love to do something there, but it's hard. You see, the current scenario in Brazil, because the support for culture under the current political climate is not ideal, and making films has become so difficult. Really, you are dealing with the streamers, and then you have to go to what the streamers are trying to do. And you know, they have their mandate, they have the line that they want to follow creatively, and you have to find stories that fit within what they're trying to say, and also without trying to lose my voice as a producer and what inspires me to tell stories. So I like a lot of true stories. I like a lot of things that have to do with fictional characters against political or historical backdrops, like Sergio. They can be more truthful, less truthful, but that world. So I don't have a specific Brazilian character that I would love to tell a story about off the top of my head, but hopefully it's coming. And my favorite part of making Sergio, I think it was the ability to see so different parts of the world and work with people from those places and experience their culture, their belief system, their habits, their, you know, what's particular to them through our work relationships, and then having a chance to meet them as people and to see those places. And we all, and this is very special, we all were really telling the same story. I think that the people that came to work on this film didn't come to work on the movie because we paid the most. As I said, in Jordan, they have movies that the budgets are 10 times the budget of Sergio or more. They came because they loved what the film said. They came because they wanted to be part of telling this particular story, and a story that says what this story was trying to say, or a vision of the world that was a vision of the world that involved empathy, that involved seeing the other, that involved diversity, that involved respect for the different, that involved inclusion, that involved human rights, and I think they came for that message.
Thank you, Isabella. Leticia, please.
Hi, I am from UFMG. I study physical therapy. So I'm not on this in this area, but it's really nice to see you all talking about. And I think one of my biggest curiosity is just how you can make some critical. So like for me in the movie, it's crystal clear how US was not really good on the situation and how it could been different, and how is like for the business matter to put this on a movie. So like for the Netflix, for example, to them accept to make this critical and to see how it was a little bit unethical, what happened there. How is for like you to say, we are going to do this, you are from the country that did it, so are you going to pay us for making this critical? How does it work in the movie in Hollywood studios and stuff like this?
Just to make sure I understand the question, you're asking how was the relationship with Netflix, the studio, as far as them agreeing to tell the story the way we told the story? Is that the question?
Not only Netflix, but like in general, to make critical for like big countries like US, how it happens, it's okay, or do you have some trouble on doing this and has to make it like seem better than it really was?
Oh, of being critical of them. Okay.
Yes.
No. Thank you. As we discussed earlier, we did not have any issues with governmental agencies in any country. It would be very unusual that a country would come out to speak against a film. It has happened. A few countries have done it. North Korea has done it. Russia has done it. But it's very unusual that a country will come out against a movie. It's a lot of noise that they don't need. It's a lot of work. Also, I think that our story is so backed by news footage, and all television stations were outside the Canal Hotel broadcasting live. A lot of scenes that we have where it's Sergio at the White House or Bremer outside the rubble, all of those scenes are lifted, recreated from footage that actually aired around the world. Anyone can Google the events. There are survivors who were there to tell what happened on that day. There's books, there's theses, there's in Rio, there's the Centro Sergio Vieira de Mello. There's a lot of resources, by the way. If anybody wants to know more, please, about Sergio's life and work, you can always reach out to Sergio Centro Sergio Vieira de Mello in Rio. I'm sure they are an amazing resource. And, you know, Carolina, Bill, Bill, by the way, Master Sergeant Bill, was on set with us, the real rescuer Bill, the same man that I said had the argument of removing the guards. You know, there was a question of whether or not that happened. I forgot to say something very important. He was with us on set when we shot all of the rescue mission of the rubble that I showed the model for. So we had him as a consultant. He sat there. He sat actually most of the time by my side in the producer's unit. And he was a consultant leading up to the shooting of that scene on how he came down, if that was realistic, how they would administer the shots, how Sergio was positioned, how he saw Sergio. So when the camera was up, what he could see of Sergio. So it's an immense privilege to have somebody like that who was there, one of the only people, not the only one, because Andre was also there, but in the rubble, but the person who first arrived, who found Sergio and who was there until the very end. Tell the story, and more than that, choose to also be on set to help the authenticity and want to relive that, which for him is also very traumatic. Remember, these people do not make promises lightly. When he promised Sergio, I will get you out, he believed that he would get him out. As he always said, and this is in the movie, to your question, we did not shy away from saying these things. He said it in real life. He said it in interviews. He said it in the film, his character. Any other city in the world, I would have gotten him out. But the equipment needed to rescue Sergio was at the airport, in storage, in other places. Because I guess you can invade a country with enough, if the word might be arrogance, and think that nothing may go wrong, or occupy a country, or whatever word you want to use depending on your angle onto the situation at large. So the equipment was not available because I don't think anybody felt they needed it. But he explained to me on set, because that's, again, too much information to put in the film, like what he would need, and if he had, he would be able to get him out. Now, would Sergio survive the injuries? That is not what he promised. He promised he would get him out, and he failed in his eyes. So having that man on set for me was a privilege. I'll always remember that. The film is certainly better for him. So were we critically received by institutions? Not really, because the story is widely documented. Of course, different people will have different feelings and say, memory is also a tricky thing. Different people who live through very traumatic events remember or don't remember the day differently. It's like, oh, I saw Sergio first. I saw Sergio around this time. No, I saw Sergio around that time, and I was the first there. No, I was the first there. No, the noise came first. No, the impact came first. So people remember things. Imagine the people who went through that. Memory shifts to accept trauma, to survive trauma, to deal with reality. And some is just documented because we have footage of it. So no, we did not have any pushback from any institutions for all of these reasons, I believe.
Thank you very much, Leticia, for this question. And Lara.
Hi, I'm Lara. I'm from São Paulo. And I really like the film, first of all, and what you just said about the actual footage as a history student, that was very interesting for me to see. And my question is about creating the character Sergio through Wagner's perspective. And how was it like balancing his artistic interpretation of Sergio with these, like you said, almost unusual accuracy that the film has?
Great question, thank you. What do you study again?
History.
History, thank you. Listen, I think when you go to an actor like Wagner, that's the other thing. Who plays Sergio? And the studios have their ideas of an American actor, but then we could only do the film in English because I was not going to have an American speak Portuguese with an accent, which is Sergio's original language, so or native language. So, or for some people say, well, Javier Bardem, yeah, but he is from Spain. Yeah, but close enough. Well, it is close enough for a version of the movie. It's not close at all for the version of the film that we wanted to tell. I think that a lot of these stories that take people from other places and make them speak them, I think they are almost old-fashioned. I think old Hollywood used to do that. But I think that luckily, mostly luckily, we're at a time where we have become more aware of cultural sensitivities and who can tell whose stories. I don't believe that only a Brazilian can tell a story about a Brazilian, that only an American can tell a story about an American. And if you're an American, you cannot tell a story about, you know, a British person or whatever. I don't think that that is accurate. I don't think you need to be just like Sergio to be interested in Sergio's story. That is the whole point of the story, of diversity, of seeing the other, of empathy for the different, and so on and so forth. But of course, when you go to an actor like Wagner, who luckily is perfect because he's Brazilian and he was already interested and aware of Sergio and was interested in playing Sergio, and I heard that, so it was a perfect marriage of interest and opportunity. An actor like Wagner, who is as talented as Wagner, as experienced as Wagner, he comes with a vision, right? He comes with a vision of who the character is, and then that vision is discussed with the director. That version also is guided by the script. And then the director has a chance to mold that vision with the actor. Some actors are more open, some directors are more open. In this case, the whole film was very collaborative. It was very much a joint effort to find the tone of the film. Also because the director was an expert in Sergio, so he was such a wealth of information source. But I think Wagner had a very clear vision of how to translate. Once you identify the tone, the voice, I think he had a very clear understanding of how to convey those emotionally, how to convey with silence, with a look, with his body language, how much he wanted to approximate from the real Sergio, how much he wanted to give himself freedom. But that's why you go to an actor like Wagner. It's to have that intellectual acumen, the intelligence as an actor to make those choices. And an actor is largely their choices, right? So I think that, and of course, somebody can say the film and say, oh, he was too emotional. And somebody will say the film and say he was too dry, the opposite of that. And both people will look at the same film as with every movie and have varying opinions. But I think he found a consistent, clear version of how he wanted to make Sergio authentic and bring his essence, which I think is always the most important. If you look exactly, often people say, oh my gosh, look at somebody's work in this biopic. They look exactly like the character. If somebody looks exactly like the character, for me personally, Daniel, or not, it's not a sign of a great performance. Looking exactly like somebody helps, is characterization. But what you need to bring for me is the essence of the person you're portraying. And if it resonates with the rest of the cast around you, and if it resonates with the tone of the film itself, if it doesn't go against the grain of the movie. So we try to approximate his look to Sergio, but we were not going to do like prosthetic nose, and that didn't make any sense for us. It was not necessary. It was not called for. Also, again, In the case of Sergio, as we discussed here, and I'm so happy that the film has allowed even Brazilians, even people in international relations, to become aware of a phenomenal man like Sergio and his achievements and what a Brazilian has done on the international stage. Sergio is not somebody that you say his name and a mental picture comes to most people's mind. Obviously, if you're making a biopic of a very visible person, like Freddie Mercury, like in the Queen biopic, when most people think Freddie Mercury, they have a visual. If the person looks nothing like him, it's difficult to go on that ride. But the opposite is if they look identical, but they don't have the essence of the person, you get them for 5 minutes and then you lose them for the rest of the film. So for me, the essence is more important than the characterization. And Wagner brought his set of choices, and I appreciate his choices, and I think he did a phenomenal, nuanced, delicate job.
Thank you, Lara, for your question.
Thank you.
I completely agree with you, Daniel, on this point. And I was more or less used to the Sergio figure before seeing the movie. And I remember in the beginning, in the first scene, I think that for those that are used to Sergio, used to the documentary, the fact that that scene is more or less reproduced, that advice to the UN officers, it's phenomenal. But the fact that there is this smile, the way that Wagner smiles is quite similar to all the interviews, all the documentaries, and the way that he sustains the smile when he was introducing himself to the people in Timor. I think this smile is a particular nuance, and you see the character there, but you see also all these other choices that you mentioned, and different choices. But I think that the work of Wagner is also brilliant. My personal impression, of course, I'm sharing here my impression as a spectator. Last but not least, Thomas, you have the floor.
Hi. First, I want to thank you, Daniel, for the class here, for the talk, right? It's really flourishing. Want to say I really liked your movie No from the coup, the propaganda of the election, right, in Argentina, Chile.
Chile, that's right.
Yeah, the music, Chile. It's really memorizing. I was hearing the presentation. I was doing other stuff in the start, so I lost a little about the discussion. And I heard you couldn't do the movie in Timor-Leste, the part of the movie that was in Timor-Leste. And I didn't hear if you explained why there was not a possibility to do there, if was the explanation, if was anything diplomatic. And I want to ask you to why Sergio? Why you choose Sergio to make a movie of him? And how was to sell the idea of making the movie to Netflix? I know Netflix is a big platform, right? They do a lot of programs, but they have, it's an enterprise, so they want to make money. So they need to know it's rentable for them, but they have to be in their program too. A lot of people asked here if there was something you couldn't say bad things about the US, like the movie, that I didn't think it was a lot against the US, but there is a program, right? So how was the talk to Netflix? How was selling them the idea of making the movie Sergio, and how was this talk? And the last question, I'm sorry to ask a lot of things. You as a producer, a Brazilian person, we are here in a program with a lot of international students that will get to know UFMG, will not get to know Belo Horizonte after this pandemic that's happening. And it's getting to know a little here. I would like you to recommend some movies from Brazil that you think it's essential to them to watch, if you can.
Okay. So listen, forgive me, but you're gonna have to help me answer all of these questions by reminding me of the questions, because they're very varied in nature. So bear with me, help me out, we'll get through everything. Is that okay, Lucas? Okay. All right, let's start with why Timor. Okay. Timor was not a diplomatic reason. I want to stress this. I said this a couple of times on the call. Timor on the call on the Zoom. That Timor, the only issue with Timor was different than Iraq, where we could not shoot because you can't shoot this particular story in Iraq for political reasons. And listen, this is not an exclusivity of Iraq. There's many, many countries in the world where you could not shoot certain stories. They have to do with that country or not in their territory due to their laws, to their customs, to their their world, their society, right? For example, you can't go to a country where women and men are not allowed to be in the same space or work together and have a crew, because how are you going to do that, right? There's, I have a story that had a gay element in Iran. Well, obviously that cannot shoot in Iran. So there are, who knows what stories would be supported in Brazil today if the government had the ability to choose the stories that people can tell. So I think that there are countries in the world where, yes, you're limited creatively on the story you are telling, even if it does not have to do with the country itself. Am I frozen or is Tomas frozen?
I think Tomas was frozen.
Okay. Should I
No,
continue?
he's here. He's here.
Okay. I will continue. In the case of Timor, it was simply a logistical issue. To fly to Timor, you have to fly to a couple of other places before, and it's not a country that has historically a current movie industry as far as shooting international productions like our production, that's not used to international productions from a logistical standpoint, equipment-wise, crew-wise, organizational-wise, that would allow us to take a production of this size with the American requirements, with the American insurance policy, and I mean technical policy, all the way to Timor. So we did the next best thing, which was to find a place that topographically looked like Timor and bring the Timorese so that it would be authentic, as we have discussed before, right? But please understand, Timor gave us nothing but love, nothing but support, nothing but openness and generosity in sharing the story, in telling their story, in bringing their people and sending their textiles, the fabrics that you see, the instruments that you see, things that are selling at the market. All of those things came with them from Timor to our set. This is unheard of in Hollywood, and it's a privilege. And I thank you, Netflix, again, for allowing us to do that, because that has a cost. So now we go segue into your other question, which is, why did Netflix want to make this movie? Well, I think that at the time, Netflix was a few years ago, right? So let's remember, we're having this conversation in 2021. We presented the project to Netflix probably in 2016. So we're talking Netflix of 5 years ago. We shot the film in 2018. Between a studio saying yes and the movie shooting, there are many things that need to happen. It's based on a book. You need to finalize the rights for the book. You need to finalize contract for cast. You need to find the cast. The cast needs to be available on certain dates because they're doing other things. The locations need to happen. Where are we going to shoot? How much money are we going to make? How much is this movie going to cost? So I get a budget. The budget is too high. What do we cut? Can we cut this? We can't. Choices. because we need to bring the budget down to what Netflix said. I will give you X. Can you make it for X? Is the film possible for X? So they did find a number that they felt made sense commercially for them, meaning it would probably play in these markets, and these markets are secondary, and these markets are tertiary, and these markets probably will not get much of a vision traditionally when we look at comparables, or these markets don't like foreign language films, or these markets only like local productions, or they don't like movies to do with people. There's a variety of reasons. Different markets, different countries behave differently to different stories. Some countries only like supernatural stories, some countries like drama, some countries don't like drama, some countries don't read subtitles, although the film is dubbed on Netflix in a variety of languages. Don't watch it dubbed. So they gave us a number. We tried to back into that number and make the film fit what we could and decide if it was doable for that size. There was a juggling act and it was hard. But I think they realized that the film could play in various territories in the world. You're not telling the story of a pre-established household name. This is not Madonna, Freddie Mercury, Pelé, Gucci, even a president of, even Bush, like him, don't like him. It's a known name. Sergio, as we discussed, was known in a circle, but not known in the popular sense. He's not a rock star. He was a rock star, but not in the literal sense of the word. And so there is a ceiling. And they gave us a number, which was generous. As I said, I think only Netflix would support the version of the story that we told. And they saw it as an international story that could probably sell in a variety of countries and a variety of languages. I'm assuming commercially that's what they liked. Also, they realized it was a beautiful story that would make a beautiful movie. Because some people have amazing lives, but they don't necessarily make good films or good stories. It's just they're amazing unto themselves, but you can't translate their amazing onto a film or a series. And some people have stories that are not even necessarily as amazing, and they make fun series. Sergio has an amazing life, and I think a life that lends itself to the narrative form. So they said yes, luckily. That was, I think, his second question. Then his third question, I recall, was about films that I like from Brazil. This is hard. I think the industry, not because I don't like Brazilian films, there's many I like, but I think that the answer is, if you're looking historically, Brazil has a lot of great things that came from the 60s and the 70s. And that's a type of Brazilian film all the way into the early 80s. And obviously, then you have Deus e Diabo na Terra do Sol, Vidas Secas, Pichote, films that gain international recognition. Then, as we all know, for a while there, between the 80s and the early 90s, cinema in Brazil pretty much was diminished, let's call it. And it had its resurgence with Carlota Joaquina around 95-ish. And then we had the resurgence of the Brazilian industry, and that has been very robust. So then there's that wave of the 90s into the early 2000s. And in that wave, you have a lot of amazing films. And you have Bicho de Sete Cabeças by Laís Bodansky, a director that I absolutely adore. You have, a little later, you have City of God, Cidade de Deus, which was a big hit worldwide. And then later, and many other great movies that I'm not naming. And then later, you have a lot of very exciting, newish voices that came in more recent years. Obviously, you have Karine Anus, who is doing big things and now is moving on to English language. Alto da Compadecida, obrigado. Somebody, they're saying on the chat here. Yes, there's, by the way, I think this would be amazing if people from Brazil who like Brazilian movies listed some Brazilian movies right here that they like to share with people from other countries, because then we have a variety of points of view and a variety of heads thinking together in answering this question. And then I'm just kind of walking through the industry over the last 50 years. Que horas ela volta? So, okay. So in the more recent years, Then you have things that touched upon social issues, a diversity of voices. Then you have, of course, Terra Estrangeira by Walter Salles and Central Station by Walter Salles. Central Station also Oscar nominated. Both were in this resurgence in the 90s, probably 95, 6, and then 98, I think was Central Station. They're part of that category. But then if you go more recently, you have Que Horas Ela Volta, you have Bacurau, you have Som ao Redor by the same director as Bacurau. Then you have Hoje Eu Quero Voltar Sozinho. Yes, again, these films that deal with issues that probably were not touched upon earlier on, you know, also because a character like in Que Horas Ela Volta, a character like Regina Casé's daughter, who is the daughter of the maid of that family, ascending and going to college and, you know, thinking of a life with a potential that her mother didn't have, is a reality that became possible in a Brazil of the 2000s and wasn't possible before. So it wouldn't even be in the stories that people want to tell or can tell. Aquarius, also by the director of Som ao Redor and Bacurau. So all of this new wave, if you want to call it, yet again, a new wave of Brazilian cinema that is edgy, LGBTQI+ stories. There are many. Every year in Berlinale, in the Berlin Film Festival, there's always a Brazilian film. There's always visibility for Brazilian stories. In the Critics' Week in Cannes, we have had a variety of films. People are saying here, Minha Mãe é uma Peça, by, unfortunately, phenomenal talent that we just lost to COVID. And I think that, Paulo Gustavo, I think that we have a variety of voices. Some are here are very thoughtful, serious films. There you have very broad demographics like Minha Mãe é uma Peça, which is a comedy, but with a lot of heart. So I think Brazil now is plural. Brazil has a variety of voices. Brazil has independent filmmakers. And I think this is beautiful. Dois Filhos de Francisco was also a hit. So I think we have in this new wave a lot of interesting, exciting voices that are telling stories that were not told Amarelo Manga, that were told a while back. And I'm very excited about what the future holds for Brazilian cinema and series. I'm not concerned about the creative voices or the talent. I am concerned about the support that arts will receive in Brazil and from the government. That's what I'm concerned about. And how will art survive and how will film survive, because the stories are important and the diversity of voices is crucial.
I think that we couldn't finish this session in a better manner. I would suggest even that we could continue this listing of good movies stimulated by either by Thomas' question and by Daniel's suggestion on the WhatsApp group that you students have, because I think this list is an important list that also depicts the members, the Brazilian members of this summer school, but also is a good suggestion to our foreign guests to know a little bit more about Brazilian cinema. But Daniel, I have no words to thank you in the name of the UFMG, in the name of the direction of the summer school. Thank you very much. I think that I say in the name of the students, we are finishing this session. You see the number of applauses, the number of comments in the chat making compliments to your beautiful movie. And
if I just may add, Professor Davson, our Deputy Dean for International Affairs, left a message for Daniel, thanking him so much and for having such a tremendous, wonderful session. It was really, really exciting.
Yeah, Professor Davison is following us on YouTube. And I think that if Daniel allows this, will remain on our YouTube channel, because I think that this was a very valuable exchange. Daniel, once more, I thank you very much. I enjoyed very much. I have many other questions, but I think that the time now is running. But would like to say some words of closing of this session.
Listen, listen, there are a lot of questions that are rolling on the screen, and unfortunately, I appreciate the enthusiasm. I really appreciate the thoughtful, careful, well-crafted questions from a variety of areas, and that is a rare chance that one has the opportunity to speak with people from different areas, from history, international relations, public relations, and many other areas that were here with us today. Thanks for asking all these questions. Thanks for watching the film. Thanks for your interest and staying through this lengthier chat. We've been here for 2 hours. I'm really excited. Thanks, UFMG. I'm still learning to say this in English, UFMG. It's new for me. And for the opportunity to be here and share a little bit about my passion for filmmaking, for producing, and for Sergio, the movie and the man, and a little bit of my vision of the world. In an institution that is so dear and near to my heart through my own personal story in my childhood. I would say that there's so much we can learn about people and cultures and history through cinema. There's amazing cinema in so many countries of this world that don't get a lot of visibility. They will not play in the Cineplex or at the mall near you. Try and seek those films out. There's so much that you can learn about people and places through their stories. But even sometimes it's not an amazing film, but you learn something really interesting about a people. Sometimes it is an amazing film and you're surprised with people, you know, it's easy to stay with the same Hollywood actors that we know, and they do amazing work too. But it's interesting to hear voices, and hopefully with the streamers, you're having a window into a world of films that come in different languages and people that have different struggles and different aspirations that we all can learn. And as different that we all are, you find something which for me is really beautiful, which is the universality of themes, which is something that I wanted to explore with No. I said I wanted to make No so that, I remember saying in the room, so that people in Poland, who's the first country that came to my mind that day, will say, I don't know where Chile is. Chile may be in Africa, for example, but I'm inspired by this struggle. I'm inspired by these people looking for their voice. I'm inspired for whatever was happiness for them and what is happiness for me. So I think that rescuing the universality in these stories, and Sergio for me was very much a universal story in the literal sense, as well as in the metaphorical sense, was a story that I felt we needed to tell, deserved to be told. I hope we did it justice. That's for the world to decide. And again, I think we all can be kinder, look at the world from a place of empathy, like Sergio, reaching a hand to people, remembering at the end of all these conversations and these conflicts, there are people who are suffering right now, who have suffered, who continue to suffer, who now are struggling with vaccines. There are countries here that I saw on the list of places that don't have vaccines. There are countries here where vaccines have been made available and the government has found a way to make them more difficult. And I think that we should all look from a place of empathy, try as best we can to work from a place of empathy, of seeing the other, of seeing the different, understanding the world is richer and more beautiful because it is plural and because it is diverse, which I think is a little bit of what Sergio tries to tell us. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation.
It was such an honor. When is your next movie out?
Very much. Just Luciana, I have to thank Daniel once more. Thank you for sharing these final words, and thank you also for the other movies, I think that to all this what's happening in different places, it's important that vamos decir que no. And thank you, Tomas, for remembering the song that is still in my mind right now. Luciana, please, the final.
I was just gonna say it was such an honor to have him here. But also, when is the next movie out?
So the film that I just also did for Netflix, All Quiet on the Western Front, if you remember and that is an anti-war film, you know, originally from Eric Maria Remarque's book, was already a film. I won an Oscar for a movie in the 1930s. The retelling will only be out. This is how long it takes. It's already shot it, but it will only be out in the last quarter of 2022. So over like a year plus from now.
Okay, we'll expect that.
We don't have a date yet. I would love to be shooting something else before then. You guys made me think of a lot of stories of Sergio of way back when, and hopefully I can shoot something or more than one thing before then. But the next one that is already in existence and coming out will be out late 2022.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I would love to get this list of movies because I myself can educate myself in some of the Brazilian movies that I have missed over the last few years or whatever many years, because I'm not there and you can't always have access to these stories. So
let's open our cameras and I'm gonna take a group picture. Yay! Great.
Well, listen,
thank you guys.
I appreciate everyone. It's been a pleasure. Many, many thanks.
Bye-bye, guys. See you tomorrow, right? Bye-bye.
Be safe.